My mom had been gone for just 14 days when my dad decided to marry a woman, nearly 25 years younger, and forced me to be his happy witness. But he didn't know I invited the two guests he feared most too. The wedding. Welcome to Storytime Reddit, everyone. I'm a 17-year-old guy, and what I'm about to share might shock you. It might make you angry. You might even think I'm making it up. But I promise you every word of this is real. And I hope you'll read it all the way through, because this is the very first time I've ever had the courage to tell the full story of everything I've endured over the past 17 years of my life. I was raised in a household where love wasn't just rare, it was practically non-existent. In my world, affection wasn't something you received, it was something you wished for, silently, knowing deep down it might never come. My father, he was never what anyone would consider a real dad. From as far back as I can remember, he was bitter, irritable, always snapping over the smallest things. He treated me less like a son and more like an obligation, like I was just another chore he never signed up for. And honestly, I don't think he ever wanted to be a father. And judging by how he treated my mom, I don't think he ever wanted to be a husband either. My mother, though, she was everything to me. My light in a very dark tunnel. She was gentle, endlessly patient, but beneath that softness was a quiet kind of strength. A strength that let her survive under the same roof as a man who never once showed her the love she deserved. She stayed for me. I saw that. She didn't want me growing up in a broken home. I begged her more than once to leave him, to take me far away from the war zone we called home. But she'd always shake her head with a tired, sorrowful smile and say, "Just a little longer, sweetheart, for your sake." And she held on. She really tried until the day she couldn't anymore. 3 years ago, my mom was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. That's when our already fragile world completely collapsed. Watching someone you love slowly fade away while you're powerless to stop it, that does something to you. I saw her lose weight, her energy, her ability to breathe without pain. And all the while, my dad went about his life like none of it mattered. He didn't take her to the hospital. He didn't stay up with her when the pain got unbearable. That was all me. I was the one making her soup, doing the laundry, reading her old books just to distract her from the agony. A 16-year-old playing nurse, chef, and therapist because no one else would. And then, 4 weeks ago, I held her hand as she took her last breath in the hospital bed. I didn't cry right away. I had been holding it all in for so long, trying to be the strong one, that I didn't even know how to let it out. But when I finally did, I shattered. What I didn't expect was how little it seemed to affect my dad. I thought, just maybe, he'd show a flicker of grief, some sadness. But no, he went back to work the next day. He smiled. He laughed, like he had just been unshackled from something that was holding him down. And then, just 14 days after her funeral, came the cruelest twist yet. My dad brought home a new woman, a stranger. She was young, maybe mid-20s, and beautiful in that polished, put-together way that made my skin crawl. She was lounging in our living room, drinking coffee in my mom's old robe like she owned the place. I asked who she was, trying not to scream. My dad just grinned like he was proud of himself and said, "That's your new mom." I was stunned, horrified. I shouted, "It hasn't even been 2 weeks. Mom isn't even cold in the ground." But he shrugged, told me I had to respect his new fiancée because they were getting married soon. Like, within days. That's when I hit my limit. I told him flat out, I would not be at the wedding. I couldn't stomach the idea of standing there, pretending to be okay with this betrayal. And that's when he hit me with the worst threat of all. He said if I didn't show up to his wedding, if I didn't put on a suit and smile next to his shiny new bride, then I'd be out. No home, no college fund. The money he and my mom had saved for years, gone. I was trapped between two impossible choices: give in and betray everything my mother stood for, or lose the last bit of security I had left. But what my father didn't realize was I am not my mother. I wouldn't let him win that easily. He thought he could control me with threats. He had no idea I was already planning to burn it all down. The day my father brought home his much younger girlfriend, everything inside me shut down. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. My stomach twisted into knots, and my chest felt like it was caving in. Less than 2 weeks earlier, I had stood next to my mom's casket, still numb from watching her fade away in that hospital bed. And now? Now I was being told no, ordered to call some random woman Mom? As if she could just waltz in and fill the void left behind by the only person who ever truly loved me? Number not in a million years. I walked up to my dad that evening, still shaken but doing my best to stay calm. I looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I won't be attending your wedding." I braced for the storm. I expected yelling, insults, maybe even something thrown across the room, but what I got was worse, so much worse. He smiled. It was cold, calculated, a smile of a man who thought he'd won something. And then he said, "If you don't show up, you're no son of mine. I'll throw you out of this house. And forget about college that fund, it's mine now." I stood there, frozen. My blood felt like it had turned to ice. I already knew he was cruel, but this was a new level. He wasn't just being spiteful, he was using my greatest fears against me. Losing my home, losing my future, losing the last sliver of safety I had left after losing my mom. But that wasn't even the worst part. He didn't just want me there because I was his son. Number. That ship had sailed a long time ago. He wanted me there as a proper piece of moral decoration to make everything seem okay. "If my own kid shows up," he said, "no one can say anything. They'll think it's normal, acceptable. Understand?" Oh, I understood. I understood perfectly. He didn't want family, he wanted optics. He wanted to parade me around like some kind of seal of approval, so he could justify rushing into marriage with a woman barely older than his own child, just 2 weeks after burying the woman he vowed to love forever. I cried that night, hard, not because I was weak, not because I was scared, but because I had never felt so profoundly betrayed by someone who was supposed to love me unconditionally. And after the tears dried, something inside me hardened. I knew I had to play along for now. I had to bide my time, wait for the right moment. So the next morning, I walked into the kitchen, looked him straight in the eyes, and said, "Okay, I'll come to the wedding." He nodded with that same smug grin, thinking he'd won, thinking he had successfully broken me like he always did with my mom. What he didn't know was that I had already started planning something that would make him regret ever trying to manipulate me. I knew I couldn't go toe-to-toe with him in terms of money or authority, but I had something he underestimated: my mind, my anger, and a burning sense of justice. So I watched, I listened, I kept my head down and acted like I was giving in, but behind the scenes, I was observing every little detail. Waiting for one crack in his carefully constructed story, one weak spot I could drive a stake through. And then, it happened. One night, my dad and Melissa, his shiny new fiancée, decided to go out to dinner. They said they were celebrating their love, which almost made me gag on the spot. They left in a hurry, laughing as they went out the door. And that's when I saw it. His laptop, sitting wide open on the coffee table, not shut, just at the lock screen. I didn't even hesitate. I walked over, heart pounding. My hands were shaking as I sat down in front of it. I typed in the first password that came to mind. Wrong. Tried another. Still wrong. And then, on a whim, I entered something stupidly predictable: Melissa, followed by his birthday. Click. I was in. I stared at the screen, half laughing, half disgusted. It was so typical of him to use something so shallow as his new girlfriend's name as his password, but I didn't waste time judging. Because what I was about to uncover was going to change everything. The screen flickered to life, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. It felt like I had just stepped into a forbidden world, one I had no right to enter. But truthfully, I didn't care anymore. My father had already betrayed every boundary of decency. He had lied to me, manipulated me, tried to force me into playing a role in his sick charade of a wedding. I had nothing left to lose and even less reason to respect the lines he thought I wouldn't dare cross. So I started digging. First his emails, then his folders. Nothing out of the ordinary, just some work documents and junk mail. But then I clicked on the Facebook icon. That's when everything changed. There were two profiles. One was familiar, his public life, the one I'd seen before. It had pictures from work conferences, the occasional photo with coworkers, and a few old family pictures that included my mom and me. Harmless enough. But the second account, I had never seen it before. The profile picture was vague, dim lighting, no clear face, and a name that wasn't even his real one. Suspicious already. I clicked on it, curiosity quickly being replaced by dread. As the page loaded, my heart started to pound. I clicked into the photo albums, and my stomach dropped. There he was, me father, laughing, smiling, hugging people I'd never seen before. Elderly folks who looked like they could be my grandparents, middle-aged adults, maybe aunts and uncles, and younger kids, all gathered around him like he was this fun, beloved family man. I didn't recognize a single face, but I couldn't deny the resemblance. They were family, his family. I scrolled further, and the deeper I went, the more sick I felt. Birthday parties, backyard cookouts, Christmases, 4th of July barbecues, even a family camping trip. All those years when my mom and I spent holidays in cold silence, too broke and too bitter to celebrate anything, he was out there smiling with them, living a double life we knew nothing about. But the worst part? He had lied to everyone. To his side of the family, he claimed that he had broken up with my mom years ago, that he was living alone, maybe even dating. They didn't know she had died just 2 weeks ago. They didn't even know I existed. And to us, me mom and Mehe said that his family was toxic, judgmental, that they had cut him off because they couldn't accept my mother. He said he had no choice but to go no contact with them. That it was for us. But that was all a lie. I found messages between him and his father-me grandfather. They were close. He even brought my grandparents into town once and had them stay in an apartment nearby an apartment my mother never even knew existed. In their minds, he was just a man trying to start over, single, childless. Let that sink in. Iha's only son was a secret. He had completely erased me from one half of his life, not by accident, but by design. My hands were trembling as I took screenshot after screenshot, every family photo, every message, every comment filled with lies and half-truths. It was all there, all the proof I needed. Then, I scrolled through his friend list and found a name that sent a chill down my spine. His father, my grandfather, a man I had never met. I clicked on the profile and stared at it for a long time. Finally, I opened my own Facebook account, took a deep breath, and sent him a message. I explained who I was. I attached the screenshots. I even included photos of myself with my parents to prove it wasn't a prank. Then I wrote, "I'm his son, and I think you deserve to know the truth." And I waited. 1 hour. 2 hours. Nothing. I went to sleep that night convinced he'd ignored either, thought I was some cruel troll. But then, the next morning, my phone rang. The voice on the other end was shaky, aged, and filled with something I couldn't place: shock, maybe even guilt. "Are you really his son?" I broke down. I couldn't help it. For the first time in my entire life, someone from the family I'd never even known existed called me grandson. And in that single moment, I knew everything had changed. I was no longer alone. And the reckoning? It had just begun. After that call, I poured my heart out. I told my grandfather everything. About my mom's death. About my dad's plan to marry a woman just a few years older than me. About how he blackmailed me, threatened to kick me out and keep the college fund if I didn't pretend to support his twisted fairy tale. I told him about growing up in silence, about learning early on how to live without love, without safety. I expected disbelief. But there was only pain in his voice when he replied, trembling with rage and regret. "Son, I'm so sorry. I didn't know my boy had become this cruel. Your grandma and I are coming, and we're going to put an end to this." And for the first time, I believed him. I was absolutely stunned. Just one phone cologne conversation with two people I had never even known existed, and suddenly, I wasn't fighting this war alone anymore. I had backup, real family. People who stood up not because they had to, but because they believed in the truth. And that moment, it changed everything. It gave me something I hadn't felt in a long, long time: hope. My grandparents, complete strangers just hours ago, were now offering to stand beside me, to help me confront the man who had spent years manipulating my life like a puppet master. There was no hesitation in their voices. No second guessing, just quiet determination, and from that moment on, we started planning. I gave them every detail I knew about the wedding, the exact date, the exact time, the exact location. It was happening right in our backyard, under the disguise of a private, intimate ceremony. Only a handful of people had been invited, maybe 15 total. Mostly my father's co-workers and his carefully selected friends. Not a single member of the family had been contacted, not one. That was no accident. They didn't want anyone there who could expose the truth. But I did. I needed them there. The morning of the wedding, I played the perfect role. I woke up early. I shaved. I ironed my shirt. I helped carry tables out onto the lawn. I strung up fairy lights like everything was picture perfect. I even posed for photos with the so-called groomy, smug, self-satisfied father who spent the entire morning grinning like he'd already won. Meanwhile, I was silently counting down the minutes. When it was finally time for the ceremony to begin, the guests all took their seats. There was soft music playing. Someone handed out programs. Melissa, the bride, walked out in a flowing white dress that shimmered in the sunlight, clutching a bouquet of pale pink roses. Her eyes sparkled like she was living some kind of dream. People clapped. My father stood at the altar, practically glowing, like a kid who got everything he wanted. And me? I took out my phone and sent a single text to my grandfather. Now, a few minutes passed. The officiant began his speech, something about new love rising from the ashes of grief. I tuned it out. My heart was pounding. And then I stood up. I stepped away from my seat and walked slowly down the aisle, but I wasn't alone. I was flanked on both sides by my grandparents, the very people my father had spent nearly 2 decades lying about, the very people he had sworn didn't exist. Heads turned. The entire atmosphere shifted like someone had opened a door to a blizzard. The air went cold, thick with tension. My father's face twisted as he saw us. His smile dropped. His eyes went wide. He looked like he'd just seen a ghost or three. Melissa's lips tightened, her brow furrowed. She turned and stared at him with a look that could cut through steel. I walked all the way up to the altar, stood directly in front of my father, and said clear, calm, and loud enough for everyone to hear. "Congratulations, Dad, but it looks like you forgot to invite two very important guests, your own parents." He didn't move, didn't blink. It was like he had completely shut down. I continued, my voice steady. "I know everything now, about your secret Facebook account, about the web of lies you built though. You told them that Mom had died years ago and told us that they were monsters who had disowned you. About how you wanted me at this wedding just to make everything seem normal. But I'm not here to play along anymore. I'm here to speak the truth." I turned and looked at my grandfather. He gave a firm, approving nod. "They've told me you're no longer in their will, and I'm telling you now I don't want your money either. I don't need your lies. I don't need your fake version of family, because for the first time in my life, I have people who truly love me, and that's enough." And then, without waiting for a response, I turned around and walked back down the aisle, this time arm in arm with my real family. The wedding? It crumbled almost immediately. Melissa was crying before we even left the yard. My father tried yelling after me, calling my name like some desperate actor in a bad play. The guests, confused, stunned, unsure of what to do, started whispering among themselves, slowly breaking off into uncomfortable little clusters. And my father? He stood frozen at the altar, like a statue of his own shattered ego, watching his entire charade collapse in slow motion. That day will haunt him for the rest of his life. And as for me, that was the day I stopped living in his shadow. That was the day I stepped into the light and began again, finally, with a family that was real. That night, after the wedding imploded and every lie was laid bare, we returned to the hotel where my grandparents were staying. The adrenaline hadn't faded. My hands were still trembling, my thoughts racing with everything that had just happened. But instead of silence, there was conversation. We stayed up talking late into the night, past midnight, past 2 a.m., maybe even later. No one was counting hours. We were counting truths. Grandpa sat across from me, his tea untouched, and for the first time in my life, he told me about his son, me father, back when he was just a boy. He told me about a defiant teenager who always pushed boundaries, about a young man who made selfish choices, one after the next, about the heartbreak of watching someone you love slowly become a stranger. He didn't speak with hatred, just sadness. Deep, lingering sadness. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to justify anything, but I listened, and slowly, something in me shifted. For the first time ever, I could see my father not as the monster who raised Mabut, as someone deeply broken, someone who had chosen wrong so many times he could no longer tell right from anything else. I didn't forgive him, but I understood, a little. The next morning, just after breakfast, Grandpa got a phone call. It was him. My father. He was pleading to meet, his voice shaky. He said he had been misunderstood, that he just wanted a chance to explain everything. I didn't want to go. Every fiber in me was screaming no. I'd had enough of his lies, enough of his guilt-tripping, enough of his performance. But Grandpa gently put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Let him speak just once. Not for him. For you. So you know that you've lost nothing and walked away with your dignity intact." And maybe that's what I needed. Closure. So, the following morning, we waited. He showed up looking nothing like the smug man I'd known all my life. His shirt was wrinkled, his eyes puffy, skin pale. He walked in like someone who had been kicked out of every room he once ruled. He didn't make eye contact right away. He sat down slowly, glancing from me to my grandparents, then back again. For the first time, he looked small. He cleared his throat and mumbled, "Mom, Dad, I just wanted to live my life." His voice cracked, maybe from emotion, maybe from shame, but my grandfather wasn't moved. He crossed his arms and leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowed and voice sharp. And the price of that life was betraying everyone who ever truly loved you? Silence. For a moment, it felt like the room had frozen over. My father looked down, lips pressed tight, but didn't argue. He knew he couldn't. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just my story coming full circle, it was his too. A man who had chosen lies over love and now had no one left to lie to. Looking back, I never could have predicted how fast everything changed. Just 1 week earlier, I was drowning, crushed by the weight of grief, rage, and helplessness. My mom had just passed, and my father was trying to force me into being a prop at his sham wedding to a woman young enough to be my sister. But now I had a mission, a voice, and people who finally stood in my corner. That first call with my grandfather had unraveled the silence I had carried for years. I told him everything, about the cancer, the neglect, the emotional abuse, the manipulation. I told him how my father tried to trade my future, my college fund, for my compliance. I told him how I grew up in a house that had walls, but no warmth. He didn't speak for a long time. But when he did, his voice trembled. "Son, I'm so sorry. I had no idea my boy could turn into this. Your grandma and I, we're coming, and we're going to end this mess together." I sat there in disbelief. A single phone call had changed the trajectory of my life. Two people I didn't even know a day before were now planning to stand beside me, not because they had to, but because they believed I deserved better. And that was the moment I realized. Sometimes, family isn't who you grow up with, it's who shows up when it matters most. So we made a plan. And it was the beginning of everything. The morning of the wedding, I played my part like a clueless kid. Dressed up, helped set the tables, even took a photo with the proud, groomy, self-satisfied father. He was all smiles that day. Meanwhile, I was counting the seconds. As the ceremony began, everyone took their seats. Melissa's bride walked down the aisle in a glowing white dress, holding a bouquet, eyes sparkling like she was living in a fairy tale. Guests clapped. My dad stood at the altar, grinning like a little boy. And me? I quietly sent a text to my grandpa. Now. Minutes later, as the officiant started speaking about new love blooming after loss, I stepped out from my seat and walked toward the aisle, hand in hand with my grandparents. Everyone turned to look. The air froze. My father's eyes widened as he saw me and his parents walking together down the aisle, like a slow-motion scene from a dramatic movie. Melissa looked confused, lips tightly pressed together. All eyes locked on us. I stopped just in front of him, then said loud enough for the whole wedding to hear, "Congratulations, Dad, but I think you forgot to invite the two most important guests in your life, your own parents." He froze. Melissa turned to him like she had just realized she was marrying a stranger. I continued. "I know everything, about the secret Facebook account, about how you told your family mom was long gone, just so you could live a double life for 17 years. About how you're using me to make this wedding look acceptable. But today, I choose to tell the truth." I looked at my grandfather. He nodded. "They said you won't be getting your inheritance anymore, and from this moment on, I won't need your money. I won't need your fake family. I've finally found people who truly love me." And with that, I walked away with my grandparents. The wedding crumbled in minutes. Melissa cried. My dad shouted after me, but I didn't look back. I had spent enough time in the shadows. It was time to step into the light and finally begin again, with a real family. After my dad's wedding got called off, my grandparents took me back with them to their farm in Iowa. I never thought I'd be able to live anywhere but the city, but it turns out, peace and quiet was exactly what I had been searching for all along without even knowing it. Mornings started with the sound of birdsong instead of shouting. Evenings were spent around the dinner table where everyone actually laughed and asked about each other's day with real care in their voices. My grandparents introduced me to aunts and uncles I never knew existed. None of them asked, "Why are you just showing up now?" All they said was, "Your family." That's all that matters. I can't describe the feeling of being accepted like that. It was as if I'd stepped into an entirely different story, where the main character finally found the home they were meant for. That fall, I started college. The university wasn't far from the farm, only about a 45-minute drive, so I went home every weekend. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I missed my grandma's laugh when I told stories from school. I missed my grandpa teaching me how to drive his old pickup down the dirt roads. And I missed breakfast. Eggs, crispy bacon, pancakes stacked high made with love. I'm studying communications, something my dad once scoffed at as useless and not a real career. But my grandpa sees it differently. He said, "If that's what you love, go all in. Money can't buy happiness, but freedom just might." And I've never seen anyone live as freely as my grandfather does. As for my dad, he's tried texting. He's sent emails, sometimes weak apologies, sometimes angry blame. "You ruined my life." I don't reply. Not out of spite, but because I don't feel the need to anymore. He's my past. I'm focused on the present and on building a future. Melisseth woman who was supposed to become my stepmother disappeared from his life after the ruined wedding. Word is, his friends turned their backs on him, his job took a hit, and his reputation? Gone. But I didn't feel satisfaction hearing that, just regret. He could have been a father, he could have had a real family, but he chose lies instead. Only once in the past year did I dream of my mother. In the dream, she hugged me and whispered, "You deserve happiness 7 if your father never gave it to you." I woke up crying not from pain, but from release. I don't know what the future holds, but I know this. I'm no longer the boy who had to hold his breath to survive each day. I've learned to breathe. I've learned to love, and I'm finally living my own life. For the first time, with all the freedom and hope a 17-year-old kid never thought he'd have.